Dawn, April 5, 1943. The Solomon Sea lies flat and silver, a mirror for the first pale light. Aboard the Japanese destroyer rewrote, a lookout scans the horizon. The air is warm, heavy with salt and the lingering smell of engine oil. It is the quiet hour. The ship cuts through the water, part of a formidable fleet transports, destroyers, a cruiser carrying men and materiel for a critical reinforcement. To the crew, this is a routine patrol in contested waters. They are vigilant, but they watch the sea and sky for the known threats, submarines, carrier aircraft. The concept of an attack from here, from this direction at this moment, does not yet exist. Then, a low drone, not from the vast emptiness above, but from behind the dark, jagged spine of New Guinea's coastline. A shape emerges, then another. Not sleek naval dive bombers, but twin-engine, land-based bombers flying impossibly low, their wings almost clipping the wave tops. On the rewrote, the realization is slow, then instant and absolute. These are not supposed to be here. The alarm bells begin to shriek. The calm of the morning was about to be shattered by a new and terrifying form of aerial warfare. By early 1943, the tide of the Pacific War was in a delicate, bloody balance. The Japanese advance had been checked at Guadalcanal after 6 months of brutal attrition. The Allied victory there in February 1943 was not an endpoint, but a pivot. The strategic initiative had subtly shifted. Now, the fight moved west, along the spine of the Solomon Islands and the northern coast of New Guinea. This was the Allied path to Rabaul, Japan's formidable fortress in the South Pacific. For Japan, the response was the Igo Sokusen, a major aerial counteroffensive meant to cripple Allied air and sea power in the region. Simultaneously, they aimed to reinforce their positions. A key lifeline was the Tokyo Express, not a single route, but a system of nocturnal high-speed runs by destroyers and transports to move troops and supplies under cover of darkness. It was a tactic born of necessity as Allied air power dominated the daylight hours. These convoys were vital and their protection was paramount. They typically sailed by night and aimed to be in friendly waters, or under the umbrella of land-based air cover by dawn. Facing them was the Allied air forces in the southwest Pacific area, a heterogeneous and aggressive command under General George Kenney. His 5th Air Force was a mix of American and Australian squadrons, and Kenney was an innovator. He championed low-level attack tactics, skip bombing, and the relentless modification of aircraft for specific, brutal tasks. His target was not just enemy aircraft, but the logistical veins of the Japanese empire, the ships that carried the oil, the troops, the rice and the ammunition. Cut those veins and the fortress of Rabaul would wither. The stage was set for a relentless campaign of interdiction, where every dawn patrol could mean a sudden, violent death. The chessboard was the Bismarck Sea, the Solomon Sea, and the waters off New Guinea. The pieces were moving, and one American bomber, designed for a different war, was about to find its perfect, violent purpose. Kenney's 5th Air Force was a laboratory of aerial destruction. The standard high-altitude bombing of ships had proven woefully ineffective in the vast Pacific. Kenney needed a sledgehammer. He found it in the North American B-25 Mitchell, a robust, twin-engine medium bomber. It was famous for the Doolittle raid. But in the Southwest Pacific, it was being reborn. Engineers and armorers, under Kenney's relentless drive, stripped the aircraft of its lower turret and glazed nose. In their place, they installed up to 8, and sometimes more, fixed forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. This transformed the B-25 from a level bomber into a strafing gunship of unprecedented fury, the commerce destroyer. Alongside this, they perfected low-level attack profiles. Skip bombing became the doctrine. A bomber would approach a ship at wave-top height, 200 feet or lower, and release a delayed fuse bomb with the precision of a torpedo run. The bomb would skip across the water like a stone, slam into the ship's side, and detonate below the water line. It required immense courage and skill, flying directly into the teeth of a ship's anti-aircraft fire. To coordinate these complex, multi-axis attacks, Kenney relied on a dedicated reconnaissance and command network. It was this network that, in early April 1943, identified a prime target, a Japanese convoy. designated by Allied intelligence as the Yamato Force, sailing from Rabaul to reinforce Leh on the New Guinea coast. The convoy was spotted, its course was plotted, and at Port Moresby and forward dirt strips, heavily armed B-25s of the 90th Bomb Squadron, the Jolly Rogers and others were being loaded with 500-pound bombs and belts of .50 caliber ammunition. They were not planning to bomb from miles high. They were going down on the deck to turn the sea into a killing zone. The trap was set. The Japanese fleet sailed on, unaware that the rules of engagement had changed overnight. For the crew of a Japanese destroyer, dawn was a moment of heightened vulnerability, a transition from the relative safety of darkness to the exposed peril of day. The lookouts were tired, eyes straining from a night watch. There was a ritual to it, the dimming of night running lights, the increase in boiler pressure for speed, the hope to reach the destination before the Allied airmen awoke. The psychology was one of tense expectation, but it was an expectation framed by known threats. They feared the sudden geyser of a submarine torpedo, or the high-altitude formations of B-17s whose bombs rarely hit. They did not fear a land-based, medium bomber attacking like a swarm of hornets at masthead height. When the B-25s appeared, not as dots in the sky but as growing, roaring shapes racing toward them at sea level, it bypassed all tactical training. This was intimate, personal and horrifying. The first sight was often the twin engines and the glint of the plexiglass nose, already spitting fire. The terror was in the sheer wrongness of it, a bomber behaving like a strafing fighter, and doing so with a weight of fire that matched a warship's broadside. The aircraft that caused this terror was a radical departure from its original design. The modified B-5G and later the factory-built H model featured a solid nose packed with machine guns for 28.50 cals, with some models even trialing a 75mm cannon. This configuration turned the bomber into the equivalent of a flying battery. A formation of these aircraft, approaching in line abreast, could deliver a converging wall of lead, saturating a ship's deck, sweeping it clean of gun crews and silencing anti-aircraft defenses. Before the bombers even released their ordnance, the psychological impact of this strafing run was as critical as the physical damage. It suppressed the ship's ability to fight back during the most vulnerable moment of the bomb run. The aircraft itself, rugged and powerful, could absorb significant punishment and still remain controllable at the extreme low altitudes required. It was not a graceful aircraft, but in the hands of a skilled pilot, it was a precise and ruthless instrument of destruction, perfectly tailored to the tactical problem Kenney needed to solve. General George Kenney's approach was dismissively called Kenney's kindergarten. By some in the more traditional Army Air Forces, he encouraged unorthodox thinking. The tactics developed for the B-25 strafers were a masterpiece of combined arms aerial assault. Though all arms were airborne, the attack would be coordinated with other units, often Australian-made Bristol bow fighters. Fast and heavily armed twin-engine fighters would make the initial pass. Their job was pure suppression, screaming in at low level, their cannons and machine guns raking the bridges and upper decks to cause chaos and kill exposed personnel. Immediately behind them, sometimes only seconds later, came the B-25 strafers. They would finish the strafing run, then pop up slightly to skip bomb their 500-pounders into the ship's hulls. Following them, standard B-25s or B-17s might attack from medium altitude to add to the confusion. This sequenced, multi-layered assault, all happening within minutes, overwhelmed Japanese defenses designed to counter single-axis, single-altitude attacks. It was a tactical ecosystem built for annihilation. The Imperial Japanese Navy was a formidable, experienced force. Its anti-aircraft doctrine and ship design, however, were built around specific threats: high-level bombers, dive bombers like the Dauntless or Val, and torpedo bombers. Their light and medium anti-aircraft guns, the infamous 25mm Type 96, were arranged for broadside and high-angle fire. They were less effective against fast, low-flying targets coming directly head-on, a profile for which they had little training. Their radar, where fitted, was primitive and often unable to distinguish low-flying aircraft from sea clutter. Most crucially, their strategic expectation was wrong. They believed land-based heavy and medium bombers were strategic weapons. not anti-ship precision tools. The concept of a coordinated, low-level massacre by modified B-25s simply did not exist in their tactical playbook. This doctrinal rigidity created a fatal gap between perception and reality. When the attack came, it exploited a seam in their defenses they did not know was there. The terror of the sailors was, in part, the terror of the obsolete facing a new form of warfare with old tools and old ideas. The specific engagement of April 5, 1943 was not an isolated event, but a perfected execution of Kenney's doctrine. The target was a convoy of 3 transports, the Kyokusei Maru, Teiyo Maru, and Nojima, escorted by the destroyers Ariake, Mikazuki, Mochizuki, and Minigumo. They had been located and shadowed. At dawn, as the convoy navigated the waters between New Britain and New Guinea, the ambush was sprung. The first wave was not B-25s, but Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters from No. 30 Squadron. They struck at 7:35. Their 20mm cannons and 6.303 machine guns turning the decks of the escorts into a storm of shattered steel and flesh. The surprise was total. Gun crews were cut down before they could reach their stations. Bridges were raked with fire, severing command and control. In the chaos and smoke, the main event arrived. 8B to 5Cs of the 90th Bomb Squadron, led by Major Edward Porky Lana, descended to the wave tops. They did not form up for a bombing run in the traditional sense. They fanned out, each pilot selecting a target, becoming both gunner and bombardier. The modified noses of their Mitchells blazed, the concentrated fire of dozens of .50 calibers stitching lines of destruction across the water and onto the ships. The roar of their engines mixed with the metallic thunder of their guns, and the sharper cracks of Japanese 25mm return fire, which was sporadic and desperate. The bombers flew so low that sailors on the decks could see the pilots' faces. The blur of the propellers, the empty shell casings tumbling from the fuselage. The turning point was not a single moment, but a rapid, rolling collapse. The B-25s, having silenced the flak, executed their skip bombing runs. They approached at 250 miles per hour, holding a steady course directly at their targets, a nerve-shredding maneuver that felt like aiming a ship at a cliff face. Bombs tumbled from their bays, hit the water, and skipped once, twice, before smashing into hulls. The transport Kyokusei Maru took multiple hits and began to sink rapidly. The destroyer Minigumo, turning violently to evade, presented its side to a strafing run that devastated its superstructure. A skip bomb found its engine room. It was a mortal blow. The sea was now a panorama of destruction, ships burning, dead in the water or circling helplessly, men jumping into water already stained with oil and blood, and the relentless B-25s wheeling around for second passes, their guns still chattering. The destroyer Ariake, though damaged, managed to rescue survivors under continuous strafing, an act of bravery amidst the carnage. But the outcome was decisive. In a matter of minutes, the tactical paradigm had been demonstrated with brutal finality. The convoy's mission was annihilated. The destroyers Minigumo and Mochizuki were sunk, along with 2 of the 3 transports. The other escorts were damaged and fleeing. The dawn sky, now streaked with black smoke, belonged entirely to the Allies. The terror of the new had been irrevocably proven. The immediate aftermath of the April 5th attack, and others like it in this period, was quantifiable in the most brutal terms. The Yamato Force convoy was destroyed as an effective unit. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers and sailors were killed, and vital supplies for the garrison at Leh settled on the ocean floor. But the true impact was strategic and psychological. This engagement was a precursor and a proof of concept for the larger, more famous Battle of the Bismarck Sea just months earlier in March 1943, where an entire Japanese convoy of 8 transports and 8 destroyers was virtually wiped out by similar tactics. The cumulative effect was a crisis in Japanese naval logistics. The Tokyo Express was forced to alter its routes, travel further out to sea, and become even more reliant on darkness and bad weather. The confidence of Japanese mariners was shattered. Every dawn now held a specific, graphic fear. For the Allies, and specifically the 5th Air Force, it was a vindication. General Kenney reported to General MacArthur with justifiable pride, detailing the effectiveness of the modified bombers and the low-level tactics. the B-25 Strafer became a permanent and dreaded feature of the Southwest Pacific Air War. Production of the gun-nose models was accelerated. Crews grew more confident, their tactics more refined. They began to call their method masthead bombing or strafing bombing, and they applied it not just to ships but to airfields, supply dumps, and barges with devastating effect. The air-sea interdiction campaign strangled Japanese forward positions, making reinforcement a gamble with odds increasingly stacked in the attacker's favor. The battlefield had been extended from the front line to every mile of ocean. Within a 1,000-mile radius, the verifiable reports tell a story of overwhelming tactical success. After-action analyses noted the near-total suppression of anti-aircraft fire during the critical bomb run phase, attributing it directly to the forward-firing gun arrays. Japanese survivors' accounts, later gathered, spoke consistently of the shock and helplessness they felt. One officer described the attack as a storm of steel from the sea itself. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey after the war confirmed the catastrophic losses inflicted by 5th Air Force on Japanese shipping, crediting these tactics as a primary cause. The number of ships sunk and damaged in the Solomon Sea and Bismarck Archipelago in 1943 soared, critically impairing Japan's ability to hold its defensive perimeter. The psychological aftermath was perhaps best summarized by General Kenney himself. In a message to his pilots, "You have invented a new type of aerial warfare. You have scared the Japanese right out of their shoes. They are terrified of you." The fear was a weapon in itself, corroding morale and decision-making long before the next flight of B-25s appeared on the horizon. The dawn attacks of the B-25 strafers in the Southwest Pacific represent more than a tactical innovation. They signify a moment of adaptive brilliance in the machinery of war. It was the meeting of a relentless commander's vision, an engineer's pragmatism, and a pilot's courage to fly into the lethal heart of a fleet. This was not warfare of distant, anonymous bombardment, but an intimate, terrifying form of naval engagement conducted from the air. It shifted the calculus of power in the Island War, proving that control of the sea could be won from the sky not just by sinking ships, but by instilling a profound and specific dread in those who sailed them. The terror felt by those Japanese sailors at dawn was the human echo of an entire military doctrine being rendered obsolete. In the roar of low-flying engines and the flash of wing-mounted guns, a new rule was written. No longer would the sea provide sanctuary. The horizon itself had become a weapon.